But yeah, if you have not met Teddy yet, this is Teddy. Say hi, buddy. Hi. He gives 0 fucks. I am profoundly deaf in one ear, as in 100% zero sound. When I go to the ENT and they do the little deet, I can feel the vibration back here, but absolutely no words, no sound, nothing at all. Now, every ENT that I've been to has had a different theory on why I am deaf in one ear. The last one thought maybe I had mumps as a baby. There was one who thought that maybe it was from when I drowned as a baby. Yeah, I drowned. I was clinically dead for 12 minutes, but that's a whole other episode. Another one thought maybe it was simply a birth defect, because I know you're not supposed to put cotton things in your ears, but one is much smaller than the other, so they were like, oh, it didn't form in the birth canal. I mean in utero. It didn't form in utero. So how we found out I was deaf was because, like every kid in daycare, I did something weird. I mean, there's always that kid who swallows a button. I had a cousin who one day were like, what is that smell? And it was because he had stuffed an entire shoelace up his nose and it got infected and disgusting, and he didn't tell anyone. It was literally, we were like, and then, you know, out came this boogery shoelace. Mine, personally, was in daycare. I shoved beads in my ears, like the ones you're making a necklace with, but no, I decided to make internal earrings. Now, it took my birth giver 3 days to work out that I wasn't just being a brat and saying, what? And that I was actually deaf. So at that point, they took me to the doctors and they looked in there and they were like, hey, there's something inside her ears. And I'm one of those people that has memories from like when I am like 18 months old, and I distinctly remember them with this, it almost looked like a pimple extraction tool. It's a long skinny thing and it's like a little circle on the end, and they dug in and they pulled them out. And they were like, okay, cool, we've got the things out of her ear, but I still could not hear in one ear. And that's when they worked out, maybe there's a bigger problem. Now, I grew up in Australia. We had really good healthcare. It's free. So they did like CAT scans and MRIs, and they sent me to every kind of person that could possibly test my hearing, and nobody could work out what was wrong with it. I mean, hundreds of tests, and it was always a mystery. They just knew it did not work. Now, the ear does not hear sound, but they worked out I could hear vibrations, which meant I was a candidate for a cochlear implant. But by this stage, I was already modeling as a kid. My dad owned a fashion company. I was his in-house model, and then I'd gotten an agent, and I was already like modeling for other people. So mom was like, yeah, no, we don't really want like a thing on her head, because, you know, the world was not that inclusive back then of people with differences. I mean, it was the 80s. So I did not get a cochlear implant. I just learned how to deal with being deaf in one ear. Now, the modeling gigs led to acting gigs, which, because of the drowning, which again, I'll explain in another episode, I actually had a growth deformity. So I was really small, which meant that I got acting jobs for kids who were much younger because I could work longer hours. Between modeling and commercials, I ended up doing like 100 gigs before I was even 8 years old. But eventually I ended up on a TV show called Hey Dad, which was a multi-camera sitcom filmed in front of a live audience.
Hey Dad, it's not fair. I can't sleep another night in my room.
Good morning, Jenny, my youngest. How are you this morning? I'm fine, thank you. What can I do for you?
You could get me another room. The paint smell in mine is terrible.
Now, the best thing about being on a scripted TV show is even if you're deaf, it doesn't really matter, because I just learned the lines. And I learned all the lines. I mean, even scenes that I was not in. They used to make fun that if someone on set forgot their line, I would call the line out from the back. But the thing is you just learn the lines, you learn the timing. So someone says their line, you hear the line, you wait your beat for comedic effect, and then you say your line, and nobody is the wiser.
Yeah, and it stinks. Why did you have to get my room painted anyway, Dad?
Well, Jenny, I seem to remember somebody making chocolate milkshakes in there and forgetting to put the lid on the blender. Do you remember that, Jenny?
Yeah, but I said I'm sorry.
There are issues with single-sided deafness where sounds all blur together, especially like if you're in a mall or a restaurant, but a film set is very quiet. It's a controlled environment. Everyone is absolutely silent to make sure that actors can hear the lines. So even if you have a hearing problem, it's super easy because you're paying attention because you are waiting for your line, and then you say your line, and then you go on. It's probably the best job in the world if you are hearing impaired. Now on set, I loved learning all of the crew jobs. Like, I wanted to always kind of be in television, but not necessarily in front of the camera. And the crew were like family, and they were so cool. And all the camera guys like taught me from when I was like 8 years old how to use a camera. And the boom guys taught me how to use the boom. And it was to their advantage because anytime they wanted to take a cigarette break, as long as I wasn't in that scene, I was on the camera, and nobody knew the difference because I was really fucking good at it. The only problem came is everybody in a studio has headphones. You're listening to the floor on one side, and you're listening to the upstairs, to the director and all the people upstairs on the other side. Now, people in the control room do not like actors to be on headsets because for the most part, all they're doing is bitching and mooning about the actors and how fucking worthless we are and how we can't get our line or whatever. So they do not like it when I am on the headphone. But until someone asks a question or says something, they had no idea that I was listening. But the problem came because upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs, I don't have this ability. I have to either listen to the floor or upstairs. I can't do both. So I learned very early that there was going to be jobs that I would not be able to do in television. Like, I could be props or makeup or something like that, but I could never be a floor manager because they absolutely have to listen to both. Now, when we had to go and do public things as a TV show, like we'd have to go do guest appearances and things like that, everyone always thought I was super polite because I was always watching people when they spoke to me. And people would say to my mother, "Your child is so polite because she looks at you." And Mom's like, "Yeah, no, she's just reading your lips." It also means because I can't tell direction that if I'm out somewhere like in a mall or something and someone's like, "Hey, Sarah," I'm like, where is the sound coming from? Because I have no idea. So I'd be walking down the street and someone screams out my name and I'm like, I can't tell where you are, and I have to visually scan looking for the person saying my name. And then I can wave back. But until that point, people probably thought I was just really fucking rude because I did not acknowledge them. Now, people, when they speak, have accents. Everyone has an accent, whether they think they do or not. But the way that you move your lip is what affects your accent. And so a lot of voice coaches teach people how to move their lips to affect an accent. But the thing is as a deaf person, you can read an accent. Like, I was at a party and there was a guy on the pool on the other side, and I'm like, that guy's Australian. And my husband's like, how do you know? Because we were living in Texas, and I can spot the Australian accent without hearing it. And I'm like, I can read his lips. And my husband thought I was like kind of crazy at first until he realized we could walk down the street. I could see in a distance an accent, say what it was, and they'd get closer and he'd be like, holy shit, people do move their mouth differently. Now, the great thing about that is as an actor, you are expected to know how to do different accents. And because I can see an accent, I can learn the accent really well. So I was doing a great American accent in Australia before anybody else had mastered that art yet. I mean, I wasn't really getting any jobs, but when I went to auditions, they were like, fucking nailed it. Now, while it's great on scripted television, I love a good live TV segment. I love panel shows. I love going on as guests on things. I think when you can just sit and have a chat with someone, it's brilliant. But the problem comes when in situations like this, where I was on Studio 10 and I went and they had me actually co-host an entire show, which was like amazing for me, but it was really fucking hard.
Court for the final decision was one of his victims and on-screen daughter, Sarah Monahan, and she joins us now. Welcome back to the show.
Everyone on those panel shows wears an earpiece so that you can hear the guy upstairs screaming, "Move it along!" But the problem is I have to either listen to upstairs or the floor. So like the one time they made sure that the sounds of the other people on the panel were being fed through the earpiece, which was great, but I still couldn't hear the crew or the audience. And then as soon as you go to a commercial break, everyone wants to like chatter and natter and like gossip in between, but I have to pull the earpiece out because at that point they're not feeding the voices through. So I've got to pull an earpiece out to be able to hear the person sitting right next to me, what they're saying. And then I can't hear when upstairs is like, "Oh, we're coming back in 10 seconds. So I've got to watch the visual cues or hear the guy on the floor say, "Sarah, put your earpiece back in." And then I have to put the earpiece back in and hope that nobody on the floor says anything to me before we start the sound coming through the earpiece again. So as much as I love it, it is really stressful and exhausting because of I can't do both sounds. Now, in my 20s, I moved to the US, I had gotten married to a Texan, and we had gotten a Chihuahua. And she pretty much self-trained herself to be a hearing dog. Like, she would let me know when someone was at the door, if someone was outside. I mean, she alerted me to all kinds of sounds, but she wasn't really friendly, so she wasn't great in public. But we had her for 13 years. She was the most amazing dog. And when I was in the Guard, I was an intel analyst. And my second posting, we were in a creepy old historic jail building in the basement. And there was a period of like 6 months where I worked nights, and my boss also had a Chihuahua, and he was like, "Just bring your dog with you," because it was creepy. And I was going through a court case in Australia at the same time. There was like a whole bunch of like issues where we were dealing with Mexican cartels. I'm dealing with a sexual assault case in Australia, and I was having nightmares that the guy that I was going to send to jail was hiring cartel people to murder me so that he didn't have to do the whole court thing. So there's definitely some like, you know, mental issues, and having the dog all the time, like especially in the office, was comforting because if anybody came in, like the SWAT team, you could always smell when they came in, but anybody else, she would alert me, she would let me know when I was at home. If anybody came close, she would let me know. So having the dog was fucking amazing. She just wasn't good in public. We ended up losing her in between when I wrote the book and it got published, and I went on my book tour, so that was really sad. But we moved to Florida, and we just could not deal with not having the dog, and it took 6 years before we were able to even think about getting another dog. And it wasn't until COVID when everybody was wearing masks, and I remembered like that, like I can't hear people. It became really obvious how bad my hearing was and how much I relied on lip reading. Masks to me were just the worst thing. I mean, it's already bad when you're in public and there's multiple sounds and everything's muffled and it only comes through one ear. And if you're not deaf in one ear, you're probably not going to understand just how frustrating that is. But when you add on top of that, you're trying to go out and all you can hear is and like you don't know where the sound's coming from because you can't see people's lips moving. So you can hear three voices. It just sounds like one blur. So that was when we were like, I need a proper hearing dog. Now, in the US, you can either get a dog, a service dog, through a company that brings them to you already fully trained, or you can self-train a dog. So we decided that we would find a dog who was appropriate, and we ended up finding one through a breeder in Kansas who bred specifically for the temperament for service dogs. And then it was still COVID, so it wasn't like you could take them anywhere, and we were living in Key West at the time. So we did the initial portion by ourselves where we got him socialized, we trained him, we did all the basic stuff, and then we started teaching him tricks. And then at a later point, we took him through more formal training. Now, because our Chihuahua had been such a bitch, we put a huge emphasis on really socializing Teddy. And we lived in Key West when we first got him on a boat in a marina. So he was constantly surrounded by people. He was on Duval Street like at least once a week. And we would go out to restaurants because Key West is so dog friendly. It is a great place for a service dog in training because nobody gives you shit about going into places with dogs. He was welcome everywhere. So he had the most robust experience of training that we could possibly have asked for. And he developed this superpower of being able to walk into a bar, scanning all the people, seeing which one was like not dealing well with life. And he would beeline to that person and just let them hold him for like an hour if they needed to, and he would just comfort people. Like, he is the kindest soul. He's basically like a small drunk Irishman who has never met a stranger. Everyone is just a friend that he has not known yet. And he loves boat life. Like, even now, like, we've sold the boat, but even now he sees a marina or the beach and he loves it. But growing up on the boat, he was also exposed to so many things, like all of the flapping flags and bird noises and all kinds of things. So he is pretty much unshakable. Like, when we went through actual proper training, they were so impressed with how well he did with distractions. But his biggest problem was we had over socialized him because we wanted him to be social. And they were like, he'd make a great therapy dog because he can walk up to anybody and just love on them, but you really need to dial back on the friendliness. So then we had to spend like 6 months where we were literally just like, please don't touch the dog, please don't be friendly to the dog, please don't talk to the dog. If you want to pet the dog, he has to sit, stay, make sure he's calm for a good 30 seconds before you try and interact with him. And so that was our biggest struggle, was that. But everything else he was great on. And he was so smart. Like, he is so smart. On the boat, I had bought the doggy doorbell so he could go in and out because we lived on, it wasn't a sailboat, it was a yacht. And we had air conditioning. So South Florida, you want the door closed. But every time he wanted to go out, he could press the button. It flashed a light so I could see it as well as hear it. And then we would let him out, and there was one on the outside. He would press the button when he wanted to come back in. He loved to take a shit on deck. But he also just loved to go and lay in the sun. And we had windows all around, so we were watching him. It's not like he was going to swim off. But the doorbell, he learned less than an hour. I mean, he had that shit down. And then there was another couple guys who would come through with delivery boats from Mexico going up to further up Florida, but they would always stop in Key West. One of them's girlfriend had like a rescue dog thing, and I had been working on Paul with him, but that was like the one thing he didn't get. And this Mexican guy just comes up and he's like, Paul? And Teddy's like, and I'm like, what the fuck happened there? And then he knew Paul. But like, he learns things. You can take anything and teach it to him in a few minutes. And I'm so tempted to get him those doggy boards with the words, but I'm scared of what he'll tell me because he understands entire conversations. Now, we did a shit ton of training with him by ourselves, but then I also, when I would go to Australia for a couple weeks, instead of just leaving him with the in-laws, which I did a couple times, but otherwise I would put him in board and train with proper trainers. And when we were going through the initial paperwork for Australia, we were in Austin, and there's a place there that's an ADI facility that lets you train your own dog, but they end up being ADI certified. And I was going on a trip to Australia, and they were like, why don't you have him stay with this chick called Becca, and she will like clean up the last bits. And so he stayed with her for a few weeks. I think it was 5 weeks. And he came out and he immediately passed the public access test. Now, moving with a dog to Australia because I want to go home. I've lived in the States for like over 20 years. And now back in Australia, now that the court case is over, now that the bad man is being paroled and he's being deported to England, people are really like cool to me. And like, I've got an agent now. I've started doing auditions. I get speaking gigs, but it's a long fucking flight if I get anything. And basically, I just miss home. Like, I really want to come home and just live in Australia for a while. But having the dog makes it really hard, especially when we were like, it's a 6-month process, and we were at like month 5, and Australia decided just to change the rules, just change them, and we had to start over. Now, we had been doing the training at the ADI facility up in Austin because in order to have Teddy go as an assistance animal and not as just a pet, it has to be through an ADI facility. But I'm looking at the stuff, and it wasn't going to transfer for everything. It would transfer for like him to get there, but then for things like New South Wales public transport, so he could catch the bus or the train with me, which he does all the time in the US, they did not accept a lot of different companies, and none of the overseas ones were going to work. So I was going to have him recertified in Australia at this point. And I was already like, this was already going to cost me $5,000 to $10,000 for him to go through the training just to get the papers in Austin. And in the US, when you have a service dog, there's no such thing as paperwork. When people are like, let me see your registration papers, there's no such thing. If you go to the ADA website, you can train your own dog. They don't have to go through a facility. They do not have to wear a vest. They don't have to have any special equipment. It's completely against your HIPAA rights for someone to ask you what your dog is trained to do. But in Australia, you do have to have a card. They have to wear a vest. It's a whole completely different ball game. And so I'm looking at how much money I am spending in the US to get my dog certified, and it's not going to transfer. So finally, someone in a Facebook group recommended Lisa at Assistance Paws, and she is fucking amazing. Like, she walked us through the whole thing. We did our second PAT test online with her. Like, she watched us and we walked through the mall. We did like the whole thing. We did like everything just over the internet. And so she was able to go through all of the things. She got all of my paperwork together from my doctors and from the ENT and from all of the training places and all the things that he had done previously, and collated it and made a package that I could use to send to the government for Teddy's import. But then also, more importantly, for once he's in Australia, he is now already a certified assistance dog in Australia before we even get there, which means when I arrive and I am looking for an apartment, or, you know, even when I get off the plane and I want to get to the place, if Teddy's with me, it's fine, because he now has paperwork showing that he's allowed to go on public transport. I mean, we can't take him on the train from like the airport because he has to be in quarantine when we first get there. But because he's an assistance dog, he does quarantine at home with me instead of being shipped off to Melbourne for a month and doing it there and then me having to pick it up. He does it at home where I can use him. Now, one of my biggest fears is because Teddy goes everywhere with me here, and I mean everywhere. He's been on more flights than a lot of regular civilian Americans, and he's been to like San Diego and Boston and New York and Minneapolis. He lived in Key West. We drove like all through the US with him. He has stayed so often in Marriott that the ambassador program mailed us a gift box just for him. He is always on airplanes. He knows the drill. He comes through the TSA line. He walks through. I walk through. Then we go to get on the airplane. He walks in. I have a little blanket he lays on. He gets right under like the thing in front. I can fit, he's so small, I can fit a bag and him, and he is absolutely fine. Sometimes during takeoff, he wants to look out the window. That's just his thing. And then he goes back to sleep. Nobody even knows he's there. He goes to every restaurant with me, and we've been to restaurants where we've had the same waiter 3 or 4 times, and then one day we'll say something about the dog and they're like, what dog? And I'm like, the dog under the table, and they'll look and be like, you have a dog? And I'm like, he's always here. And they're like, we never knew that you had a dog, because he is so impeccably well trained. And that's the thing, you should never know. But I am worried, like, and in the US, like, service dogs are becoming common. I mean, everybody has a service dog. I mean, most of them are legit, but then you've got a whole bunch of people with fake service dogs. But you can totally tell the difference. But, and I guess because I live in a very military city, so everybody here has like a PTSD dog or a hearing dog. Like, they're just common, and they do things that you don't always see. So like, I have a friend who has one that sniffs diabetes. And then there was like the heart monitor dogs and epilepsy dogs. I mean, there's all kinds of service animals, and they're all amazing. And then you get people with their little emotional support animals who are always the worst, yappy fucking, they're like the Chihuahua that I had, where maybe they comfort you, but they're not nice. And the only time we've nearly been attacked on an airplane was by a fucking emotional support animal. But I am kind of nervous that because we are so used to just being out in public here and people don't really question it, that when we get to Australia, I've heard a lot of horror stories about how people don't really kind of get the whole concept of assistance animals yet. And you always hear about someone who went to get on an airplane and they were like, even though they've like completely arranged it in advance, or even going to the shopping mall and you get some person who's like, you can't come in here with your dog. And it's like, do you see the vest? Do you see the card? Like, they're an assistance animal. It's no different than if I was walking around with like an oxygen thing. Technically, he's a medical device. You wouldn't tell me I couldn't wear a hearing aid if one worked for me. So, like, you can't tell me I can't have my dog. But when I get to Australia, I'm going to have to find an apartment. And even though technically with an assistance animal, they can't tell you no because it's not a pet. And so even if someone isn't pet friendly, but I mean, landlords can always find a reason to not let you live there. So I am kind of nervous about what it's going to be like trying to find housing with the dog, or even like the first time we go to get on a train, even though he has a train pass, is somebody going to be a dick about it? And then, you know, like restaurants, like he always eats with me in restaurants here. It's very rare. The only time I leave him home is if we're going somewhere where it's like a festival or there's a crowd, and I'm worried for his safety more than I'm worried for mine, because I don't want him getting stepped on. I don't want him getting hurt. And so there are times I leave him at home, but for the most part, he goes with me. But I can absolutely tell you that, like, if anybody asks me to do any, like, morning show TV stuff, the dog is totally coming with me. He is going to be my +1. I'm going to show him off everywhere. He is the best sidekick in the world. Any of you who watch my channel see him. I mean, he grew up when I was doing a podcast, and he was always with me. When I was on the podcast, we did a lot of filming remotely from the boat, and he was always on camera. So a lot of people already know who he is, but like, finally Australia is gonna see him in real life. And if I get an acting gig, I'm not really sure what I will do with him at that point, but we'll come to that when we get to it. But I think if I did like The 100 or one of those like super cool shows, I would totally take him. I mean, he would look really cute in a square. I mean, everybody loves dogs, right? And I think that that's actually a bonus for hiring me. But it does mean that I'm not going to do like I'm a Celebrity or Survivor, because I'm not going through this year process of getting my dog all the way to Australia and then fucking off to like South Africa for 6 weeks without him. I mean, that would just be crazy. And I don't want to be anywhere that long without my dog, and nobody's going to pay me enough to leave him alone. Now, I do have a job set up for when I get there, and one of the things when we were talking about me taking the job was absolutely Teddy will be at the office with me every single day, and they were like completely chill with it. There's already an office dog, so that part is set, and I am so excited that I'm coming in with a job where Teddy will be absolutely welcome, and I'm thrilled. Now, the other thing is I don't plan to live very close to the job, because the job is in like Marrickville and my brother lives in Mossman, and I kind of want to be close to my brother. So we will be on public transport every day because I don't feel like driving a car. So that will be interesting. We will also be looking for a groomer, because when we got Teddy, knowing that he would be going with me absolutely everywhere and with constantly staying in hotels and flying on airplanes, going to restaurants, we purposely looked for a hypoallergenic dog. Teddy is a cockapoo. He does not shed, he does not smell, but he requires frequent grooming. And I wash him for the most part, but like I don't like doing his nails because I don't want him associating me with like something that he's not thrilled about. So if you are in Sydney and you are a great groomer, or you have a recommendation for a great groomer, please tell me in the comments below, because that is an absolute must when we get there. He will absolutely need somebody who can shower him with love and give him treats while he gets his spa on, because he fucking loves going to the groomers. It is like, he loves that more than I love going and getting a massage, I think. Now, we are out at the ranch, and when I came out after the freeze, something had broken with our water. So we've only got freezing cold water, and Teddy's been running around in the mud, and he is filthy, and he's got a sticker. So he's really dirty right now, but when we go into town tomorrow, I'll give him a really good bath. He just normally lays like right off camera and is just a good boy through the whole thing. So most people don't even know he's there until I have something yummy on my hands and he wants to lick it. And on another day, I will make a video that shows some of the tasks that he is trained to do. He has several of them and he's always learning more, but this video is already way too long. But it will be cool to show you some of the things he does, just in case you're wondering. So when we eventually make it to Sydney, if you see us, then come up and say hi. Just remember, if he is wearing his vest, don't come up and just pet him. You can always ask. Maybe I'll say yes, but don't be offended if I tell you no, because he is working when we are out and about. And if you're not used to seeing people with assistance dogs or service dogs, you should never just come up and pet them. They are working and you are taking their focus away from what you're doing. But absolutely come and say hi to me, because I'm cool with that. Just ignore the dog until I tell you it's okay. But yeah, that's us. If you are into actors or dogs or actors with dogs, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, because there's going to be a lot more of us. Right, Ted? I love you. Thanks for watching. Love a kiss? Thank you.